The Group 4 version of the Suzuki Swift is one of those cars that I've had on the docket to talk about for a while, and now we're finally getting around to it, because this is a curiosity in Gran Turismo 7. It's one of those cars which reminds me, in a weird kind of way, of two other vehicles. One is the Daihatsu Vision GT car, and the other, actually more so, is how, especially in the older games like Gran Turismo 4, you would see certain vehicles running with the top tier pack that didn't really look like they should be there. I'm looking at you, Panos, I'm looking at you, Ford GT LM Spec 2, because as great as those two were, they were literally running with like Sauber C9s and Pescarolos. It just didn't really make sense. And even when you finally got around to driving them, it still didn't fully make sense, because as quick as they were, they simply were not on the same kind of level, at least when being driven by an actual person. This very much reminds me of that, because in most races that are Group 4 events, even on tracks like Le Mans, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, this car is always, and I mean always, at the front of the pack. If not leading the race, it's usually in the top three. And I'm talking top three up there with usually the C7 Corvette and the Viper. And one of the most often occasions that I will see that is at Le Mans, in the Cash Cow event. The Swift is always close to the front. It doesn't necessarily stay there, because if the race does get wet, then usually the Lamborghini takes the lead for obvious reasons, but at least for a good long while, the Suzuki is the one to beat, and on other circuits as well, that remains the case. Now, when you look at the spec sheet, it does make sense. It only weighs 900 kilos, of course, none of this is with balance of performance anyway, but 900 kilos and 345 horsepower. So if you think of it that way, those are really good numbers. I mean, if you were to take off the, for example, hatchback veneer, which it hides under, and replace it with something more applicable, well, that would be almost like kit car territory. Still though, the point remains, it is a very impressive car on paper, and even the point level is quite high. Now, this point level that I'll reference will probably change, because it does in every update, but 658 or so is what you're looking at least when I wrote down the specs. And for 350,000 credits, as of course pretty much all Group 4 cars are, the value for money should be at least as good as pretty much anything else, if not better. The curious thing is though, like the Daihatsu Vision GT, like the Ford GT LM in the older games, like the Panos in the older games, for me this was one of those cars where you see it so often at the front of the pack, and then you actually drive it and you think, okay, like I was really racing against this? Like, it's not bad, it's actually very good in a number of ways, but it's not this earth-shattering machine. At least for me, when I first drove it, it wasn't, that you kind of assume it's going to be, given how much respect they really give to this car. Now, of course, balance of performance can have all kinds of effect on any kind of Group 4 or Group 3 car, and it very much depends on the circuit, but the fact that it is still front-wheel drive can be both a benefit or a detriment, depending on the circumstance. Front-wheel drive is great. When it's in the right platform with the right performance and the right setup, it can be a weapon, and the Nismo LM car is a perfect example. If you were to use that, for example, on Monaco, well, you wouldn't stand a chance. If you take it to Le Mans with the right setup, it's an absolute beast. But if you take it on the wrong track, Laguna Seca for example, or the aforementioned track, or others as well, Ascari perhaps, it's going to struggle. Now, the Suzuki isn't as exaggerated as the Nissan, because it's not as powerful as that, but it still kind of has a note of that in there. Yes, it's very nimble, it's very small, it's very light. The front-wheel drive means that you can pretty much floor it without worrying about the car losing control, because with a front-wheel drive car, of course, it's the total opposite. It tends to be heavier when you put your foot down thanks to torque steer and understeer, rather than a mid-engine, for example, rear-wheel drive car would be, or a rear-engine rear-wheel drive. So it definitely has its strengths, it definitely has its advantages, and I'm sure it has plenty of fans, but it's a weird one in terms of just A, being given that kind of pedestal in the first place. I mean, clearly Polyphony love this car for whatever reason, but also it's a car which, for something so quick when used by the AI, I really don't see that many people talking about this car. I don't see people raving about the Suzuki Swift Group 4, and I'm sure there are people who do, maybe even more than I've seen, but generally speaking, I don't see many people saying, oh, I'm, a Suzuki shill in the racing categories of the game. The fact that the Group 3 aspect of Suzuki is much newer, of course with the Vision GT, probably doesn't help, because in terms of representing them in Nations Cup events and such, it was really non-existent until recently in Group 3, and that has an effect on Group 4 as well. This one in Group 4 though, it really does feel perfect. And in a funny kind of way, this to me feels more like what you'd expect from Group 4 than something like a Viper or a Veyron, because they are so neutered to reach that level, whereas a car like this, and I've talked on this point before on the channel, a car that's brought up to the Group 4 level will immediately have an advantage over a car that's been brought down to that level, because you have to neuter those cars so much that you're taking away what the car was intended for. You know, a Veyron with 400 horsepower is all well and good, but you're completely taking away one of its biggest strengths. Whereas with a Suzuki, you're not taking away anything, you're just improving what it's already good at. It's light, it's even lighter, it's powerful, kind of, it's way more powerful. So you're bringing it up to that level, which gives it just this innate advantage. Overall though, that's it for my brief thoughts on the car. It's definitely a strong one to go for, but not necessarily the most inspired choice, not the most interesting choice, and even though it is a little bit of the outlier, along with like the Audi TT, which strangely has front wheel drive as well, it is an interesting choice and it's a solid one all round, but I just don't really find myself being drawn that often to use the Suzuki, kind of ironically given how much the game pushes it on you thanks to the AI. Tell me your thoughts down below. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think this is a hidden gem? Do you love using the Suzuki all the time? And of course, stick around on the channel for more content in GT7 as well, be it tunes, reviews, and of course, news. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.